Hope was rarely loud in wolf country. It survived as quiet things: a hand that did not strike, a promise kept when no one watched, a name spoken without contempt. Guinevere Blackwood had once believed marriage would be one of those quiet mercies, a lawful bridge from suspicion to belonging. Instead, she learned that shame could be sharpened into governance, that a crowd could witness a cruelty and call it order, and that a woman could stand in ceremonial silk while her life was stripped from her one sentence at a time. Moonlight spilled through the carved beams of Blackwood Hall and painted every face in pale silver. Torches hissed along the walls. Cedar smoke, polished stone, wolf musk, iron from the braziers. Every scent layered thickly over the one fact she could not outrun. Darius Coldharbour, the male chosen for her in a political union blessed as fated, stood opposite her in dark formal leathers, his expression blank in the way men wore when they planned to wound cleanly. The High Elder lifted the moon bowl between them. Blood to blood, oath to oath. Guinevere raised her palm. Her fingers shook once, then steadied. She had trained herself for years to seem unbreakable in public. Darius did not mirror her. He took one step back. The hall went silent so fast she could hear the coals settle in the nearest brazier. He turned his head toward the council bench where Fenris Nightshade sat in his black and silver mantle, rings glinting at every knuckle, and waited for the smallest nod. Then Darius looked at Guinevere and spoke clearly enough for the sentries at the rear doors to hear every word. "I reject Guinevere Blackwood as my mate. She is tainted. I will not bind my line to hers." The sentence landed harder than a blow. Her knees did not buckle only because rage locked every muscle in place. Around them, whispers rose like a swarm. Tainted. Knew it all along. Blackwood decay. The High Elder did not ask for proof. He did not rebuke the timing, the theater, the calculated humiliation of doing this at the altar stone. He lowered the moon bowl and looked to Fenris as if the cousin carried the law itself. Fenris rose slowly, the picture of measured sorrow. "This is a grievous night for our house. We protect the pack first. Guinevere will submit to rejection right and immediate exile under council witness." He never looked at her as he said it. Guinevere found her voice. "On what evidence?" Fenris finally met her gaze, and there was a softness there that would have fooled strangers. She had grown up with him. She knew that softness meant he had already counted every outcome. "Evidence enough," he said. "Your mother's unresolved line, your unexplained absences from quarter records, the moon omens in your cycle ledger. You know how rumor spreads. I am containing damage." Containing damage. As if she were wrought in timber. She wanted to scream that he had signed those quarter ledgers himself, that he had controlled the clerk since Uncle Theron died, that the omens appeared in whatever books he needed them to appear in. Instead, she heard herself ask, level and cold, "And exile keeps your hands clean?" Fenris's mouth curved, not quite a smile. "Exile keeps the pack stable." Two wardens approached with the ritual iron, a narrow crescent heated until it shone dull white. Rejection marks were usually symbolic, pressed to the ceremonial ribbon and not flesh, enough to satisfy archaic custom without maiming. Tonight, Fenris lifted one finger and changed that. "Direct skin," he said. "No ambiguity." The High Elder hesitated for a breath, then nodded. Guinevere did not beg. That mattered to her in ways she could not explain. She held out her inner wrist and stared at the carved wolf on the far wall while the iron kissed skin. Pain shot to her elbow, bright and nauseating, and the scent of seared flesh climbed into her throat. She bit down on the inside of her cheek and tasted copper. When the warden pulled back, a silver-black crescent stood raised against her skin, already angry at the edges. The hall exhaled as one body, satisfied. Inside, she was thinking in a narrow, urgent rhythm. "Stay upright. Breathe through your nose. Do not touch your abdomen. Do not give them a reason to summon the healers. No one knew about the child. Not yet. The knowledge lived under her ribs like a tiny second heartbeat, and the one fact she owned entirely. By midnight, the feast tables had been stripped and turned into council desks, as if celebration had only been a temporary arrangement and punishment the real purpose of the room. They locked Guinevere in the west servant wing to await dawn escort beyond the border stones. Her bridal cloak had been taken. Her rank band had been taken. Even her mother's hair comb was confiscated and logged against estate review. Through the door came a trickle of voices from pack women she had once trained with in patrol yards. She should be grateful it was exile. Fenris spared her. Imagine carrying her sent into the den hall. Guinevere sat on the cot and pressed 2 fingers lightly below her navel, then stopped when fear made the gesture feel too exposed, even alone. Present tense narrowed her mind into survival. I am still here. I am breathing. I am not giving them my child. She repeated it until the words lost shape and became pulse. The latch clicked near second bell. Fenris entered without asking, dismissing the guard with a glance. He carried a leather folder tied in blackwood ribbon and set it on the small table as if arriving for business at a polite hour. Sign these, he said. Acknowledgement of rejection, surrender of residual claim. You leave cleanly and this can remain quiet. She laughed once, rough and small. Quiet? You staged my execution in front of 200 wolves. He ignored it. If there are complications later, this protects everyone. Complications? His gaze dipped, brief as a knife flick, to her midsection. A chill moved through her that had nothing to do with the draft in the stones. She kept her voice empty. What complications? Fenris leaned one hand on the table. Do not insult me. Your scent shifted 3 days ago. If you carry a Blackwood heir, guardianship transfers by council statute because your rejection voids maternal standing. I would place the child where lineage can be managed. Managed. The room seemed to tilt, then right itself with a terrible clarity. This was not about scandal control. This was inheritance arithmetic. You are not taking my pup, she said. His expression hardened for the first time. Do not make this dramatic. You are in no position to negotiate. He slid the papers toward her and produced an ink pen. She did not touch either. Sign. No. Guinevere. No. For a moment she thought he might strike her. He did not. That would have been too crude, too visible. Fenris preferred procedures that looked legitimate in records. He gathered the papers, retied the ribbon, and stepped back. At dawn, you will be escorted to the outer marsh road. If you run, bounty terms activate under exile law. If a child is born, report to the nearest council station within 10 days for registry. Failure is treason by concealment. He paused at the door. You were given every chance to be useful. When he left, Guinevere stood very still until his footsteps faded, then moved. Breaking happened quietly. No shattered glass, no shouted vow, only a sequence of practical decisions made in less than a minute because fear had finally aligned with purpose. She tore the hem from her gown to bind her marked wrist against infection. She stripped the pearl clasps that would catch moonlight. She checked the vent grate, the old maintenance one she had used as a child during hide-and-seek, and found the lower hinge still loose. 3 screws, 1 rusted pin, a narrow crawl space that smelled of soot and damp mortar. She slipped through on her elbows, silk tearing against stone, the rejection scar throbbing with each drag forward. Dust coated her tongue. Somewhere below, kennel hounds barked once, then settled. Her heartbeat pounded so hard she feared the guards would hear it through 2 floors and 6 walls. At the junction above the kitchens she paused, listening. Boots on the main corridor. Laughter from the scullery. No voices in the old smoke stair. She dropped the final 6 feet, landed badly on her left ankle and swallowed the cry that surged up. Pain flared, then dulled into a hot throb. She wrapped a discarded work cloak around herself, smeared ash across the bright embroidery at her cuffs, and kept moving. Rain had started by the time she reached the rear tannery gate, a hard autumn rain that blurred lantern light and flattened scent trails. Luck, at last, in a harsh form. A sentry stood under the eave, hood low. For one suspended breath she thought she was finished. Then he shifted, just enough to show his face in profile. Old Garin, who had taught her to notch arrows at 12 and never once called her weak. He looked at her torn gown, at the makeshift bandage on her wrist, at the storm beyond the gate. He did not speak. He lifted the bar and turned away as if checking the east wall. Guinevere passed him without sound. At the threshold she heard him murmur, barely louder than rain. "Take the river stones. Dogs lose trail there." Then she was in the dark beyond the pack lights, mud sucking at her ruined slippers, cloak snapping around her legs in the wind. Behind her, Blackwood Hall rose black and angular against lightning. Every tower she had ever known rendered foreign in one night. She did not look back again. By dawn, she had crossed the first boundary markers and cut through the river shallows until the water numbed her feet. She crouched beneath a fallen cedar while patrol horns echoed far behind, 3 long calls, then 2 short bounty sequence confirmed. Fenris had moved quickly. Of course he had. Guinevere pressed both hands over her abdomen, gentle now, careful, a vow shaped in breath more than sound. "They will ask whose you are," she whispered to the child hidden beneath her heart. "They will use blood and law and fear. I will give them nothing." Rain dripped from cedar needles onto her hair and face. The world smelled of wet earth and distant pine, clean in a way halls never were. When she stood again, she chose the first lie that might keep them alive and set it in place like armor. No mate, no claim, no trail worth following. Then she turned toward the wild roads and walked. She did not stop walking until rain turned to sleet, and the sleet turned to a thin white crust along the road edge, until hunger stopped feeling sharp and became a dull companion, until her body remade itself around grief and necessity. The wild roads took her name first, then her pride, then every illusion that survival would look noble from the outside. She bartered stitching for bread in river towns, slept in lofts that smelled of mold and old grain, learned which council stations logged faces and which only wanted coin. She gave birth in a shepherd widow's shed with thunder shaking the roof beams, biting down on her own sleeve so no one would hear how afraid she was. When the midwife asked for the father's line for registry, Guinevere said the lie that would become marrow: no mate. By Lyra's third autumn, the lie had hardened into routine. New border papers, new surname, no den long enough for roots. Yet Fever did not care about forged documents. Fever arrived at dusk with Lyra limp against her chest, cheeks too bright, breath turning shallow then fast, as if tiny lungs were chasing a hill they could not crest. The forest opened without warning onto raw construction and torchlight. Half-built palisades cut a dark ring through the trees. Fresh pine posts stood beside older stone buttresses blackened by old fire. Men and women moved with the clipped urgency of a pack still rebuilding, hauling beams, stacking lime-wash buckets, checking traps along the ditch line. No heraldry flew above the gate, only a plain iron sigil hammered into a crossbar. A wolf's profile split by a vertical mark, forge and fang in one shape. Iron hold. Guinevere tightened her hold on Lyra and kept moving even when her knees wavered. Mud dragged at her boots. The child's heat soaked through her tunic like a warning flare. 2 sentries crossed spears at the unfinished gate. Their cloaks carried mountain wool and cedar smoke, their stances disciplined enough to read as trained warriors, not conscripted labor. One inhaled once, sharply, gaze dropping to Lyra, then to Guinevere's face. "State your pack and business." Travelers, she said, voice frayed. My daughter is sick. I need a healer, a dry room. One night. I can pay in work if not coin. No mark band, no escort token. The second sentry looked past her into the trees. You came alone through ridge roads with a child? She gets worse when the night cools. Guinevere shifted Lyra higher and forced steadiness into each word. Question me after someone checks her. The first sentry hesitated. Our Alpha does not house unknowns inside the main ring. Then keep us in your stock shed, Guinevere said. Bind my wrists if that makes you comfortable. Just help her. Lyra made a small sound, not quite a cry, and pressed her face into Guinevere's neck. The movement brushed Guinevere's rejection scar where it hid beneath wraps at her wrist. The skin there had never healed cleanly. In cold weather it ached with an old, metallic sting, a private reminder that law had once been used as a weapon and called justice. A shadow detached from the work crews beyond the gate and moved toward them with controlled speed. The sentries straightened, lowering their spears in unison. He was taller than both guards by half a head, broad-shouldered without ornamental bulk, dark hair tied back at the nape, forearms marked with faint rune lines that caught torchlight as if hammered from old gold. His coat was practical, fur-lined at collar and cuffs, rain beading and sliding from waxed leather. Nothing about him looked ceremonial. Everything about him looked final. Cain Ironhold. Guinevere knew the name from murmured tavern talk and border gossip. The Alpha who rebuilt from ash, the one who took in dispossessed wolves if they followed his laws, the one council elders called dangerous because he did not ask permission to survive. She had never expected to stand before him with her daughter burning in her arms and mud on her hem. Cain stopped 2 paces away and assessed without preamble. Lyra's flushed skin, Guinevere's torn satchel, the way she set her feet to guard even while swaying from exhaustion. His voice, when it came, was low and even. How long has she been fevered? Since midday. Worse in the last hour. Convulsions? No. Vomiting? Once. He nodded to a runner at the wall. Fetch Nessa from infirmary. Hot water, willow bark, and the blue tin from my shelf. The runner sprinted. Guinevere had not realized she was holding her breath until it broke out of her in a ragged exhale. Cain watched her, not unkindly, but with alert caution, as if he had learned that mercy without boundaries could get people killed. Name, he said. The practiced answer rose instantly. Gwen Rivers. His gaze sharpened at the pause before Rivers, at the way her hand tightened over Lyra's back. Not disbelief. Recognition of technique. He had lied for survival once too, she guessed, or hunted people who had. Child's name? Lyra. Father? The question hit like a snapped wire. Guinevere felt the forest tilt around her, old memory colliding with fresh terror. Fenris in the locked room, guardianship transfers, managed. She met Cain's eyes and gave him the one shield she had left. No mate. He held her gaze for a beat, then another, weighing the answer and whatever pain sat beneath it. He did not challenge her. He shifted 1 step closer and lifted his hand slowly, palm visible, asking with gesture before words. May I check her pulse? Guinevere hesitated. Every scar in her history argued no. Lyra's breath rattled softly against her collarbone and decided for her. Yes. Cain dropped to 1 knee in the mud to bring himself below Guinevere's eyeline, reducing his size on purpose, making space where command could have crushed. He touched 2 fingers to Lyra's wrist, careful, respectful. The child stirred, eyelids fluttering. Torchlight moved over his face as he bent closer. His pupils widened. Amber bled into his irises, sudden and bright, the predator surfacing under disciplined control. He drew in a sharp breath, as if scent itself had struck him. Lyra blinked up at him through fever haze, her tiny hand lifted, clumsy with heat and sleep, and landed against his jaw. She stared with solemn wonder at those changed eyes and whispered, "Daddy." Silence rippled outward from that single word. The sentries went still. Somewhere behind the palisade, a hammer rang once and stopped mid-rhythm. Guinevere's body went cold, then burning, then both at once. Cain did not move. Heat pulsed beneath her skin in hard waves. Her rejection scar flared like silver fire under bandage, pain braided with a fierce, aching pull that made no rational sense, and every primal kind of sense. Scent hit next. Ironwood after rain, forge smoke, storm wind over stone. It wrapped around her awareness with the force of an oath she had never consented to and somehow recognized anyway. "Run," Panic said. "Stay," answered something older. Inside her, thought fractured into present tense shards. "This is wrong. This is a trap. This is what they will take from you. Move now. Bite if you must. Protect Lyra. Protect Lyra. Protect Lyra." But the child is not crying. The child is calm. Her hand is still on his face. Her breathing is easier. Why is her breathing easier? Cain's expression changed by degrees. Not theatrically, not with triumphant claim, but with stunned comprehension and a grief-edged tenderness that looked dragged from somewhere he kept locked. He lifted his gaze to Guinevere's. Gold still lit the edges of his irises. A vein ticked once in his throat. He seemed to feel the same violent convergence she did and refused to weaponize it. "Guinevere Blackwood," he said quietly, not as accusation, not as exposure in front of witnesses, simply the truth laid down between them. Her knees almost gave. She had not heard her real name spoken without contempt in 3 years. One of the sentries shifted, uncertain. "Alpha, orders?" Cain did not look away from her. "Open the inner gate." The sentry hesitated. "Protocol for unknown." "Inner gate," Cain repeated, calm as winter, authority absolute. Bolts scraped. Timber groaned. The gate opened. Guinevere clutched Lyra tighter and took one involuntary half-step back. Instincts flashing against memory. Doors that close, men who decide, law used as collar. Cain saw it. He rose slowly from his kneel but stayed where he was, leaving space between them like a deliberate offering. When he spoke, his voice carried only to her. "You are not cornered here?" The words were so simple they nearly undid her. Not claim, not command, choice. Lyra's fingers curled in Cain's collar as if she had known him longer than a minute. Guinevere should have pulled her back. She did not. She could not tell whether the trembling in her hands came from fever, exhaustion, terror, or the bond now locking into place with inexorable precision, thread by thread, heartbeat by heartbeat. Cain lifted one hand again, waiting for permission. "May I carry her to the infirmary?" Guinevere searched his face for hunger, calculation, ownership. She found vigilance, restraint, and a raw, almost disbelieving protectiveness that mirrored her own. Trade-offs stacked in her mind: trust him and risk everything, refuse him and risk Lyra. The crux was brutal and clear. She bent, pressing a kiss to Lyra's damp hair, then transferred the child into Cain's arms. As he took her, their fingers brushed. A live current raced up Guinevere's wrist and into her chest, lighting every nerve. Cain's jaw tightened at the same instant, as if he felt the exact path of it. They looked at each other over Lyra's fever-warm body while rain hissed against torch flames and the gates of Ironhold closed behind them. The bar dropped into place with a heavy wooden thud, and Guinevere flinched at the sound even as Cain adjusted Lyra against his chest and moved down the torchlit lane toward the infirmary. Ironhold's inner ring smelled of wet pine, coal smoke, and fresh mortar. Nothing matched in shape or age. One hall had old mountain stone at the base and new timber above it. Another was only a roofline and frame, ribs of a future building outlined against the rain. People paused as Cain passed, some bowing their heads, some staring openly at Guinevere with a stranger's caution sharpened by hunger years and hard winters. Nessa met them at the infirmary threshold, gray braid coiled tight, hands already gloved in linen wraps. "Table," she said, and Cain obeyed at once, laying Lyra on the nearest cot with a gentleness that tightened Guinevere's throat. The healer checked pupils, throat, lungs, pulse. She mixed powder with hot water, worked a damp cloth over Lyra's face and neck, then nodded once. Fever from chest congestion and exhaustion, not wolf plague, not blood curse. Nessa glanced at Guinevere without softness, but not unkindly either. She needs warmth, fluids, and sleep in steady intervals. She should turn by morning if her body accepts the bark. If. Guinevere hated that small word. She stood braced at the cot rail, hands locked so hard her knuckles hurt. Cain spoke to Nessa in low, practical tones. "Give them the south room. Keep the brazier full. Post Rook on that hall and rotate every 4 hours." Guinevere looked up sharply. "A guard?" "For your privacy," he said. "Not confinement." Nessa finished tying a cloth at Lyra's wrist and finally faced Guinevere directly. "You can sit with her through the first dose, then you sleep an hour while I watch. If you collapse, you help no one." Guinevere gave a tight nod and accepted the cup with shaking fingers. Lyra swallowed in little reluctant drags, eyelids fluttering, then sank back with a softer breath than the one that had terrified Guinevere at the gate. Only then did the room's silence catch up to her. Cain still stood near the foot of the cot, rainwater darkening the shoulders of his coat, amber lingering at the edge of his eyes before fading back to human brown. The pull between them had not lessened. It had merely settled deeper, like a hook anchored under skin. He was watching her as if measuring threat lines in every corner and finding most of them in memory, not walls. "I will have dry clothes brought," he said. "No servants." The refusal came too fast, old instinct bare and ugly in her own ears. "No one touches our things." A faint crease appeared between his brows, then smoothed. "All right. A bundle at the door. You choose what enters." He paused. "And Guinevere, no one here will demand your throat because a bond exists." The words landed harder than comfort should. She remembered moonlight on polished stone, direct skin, no ambiguity. Her mind snapped into present tense defense, familiar and brutal. He says this now. Men say many things while they assess leverage. Keep your back to a wall. Keep Lyra inside arm reach. Do not sleep deeply. Do not volunteer any truth you cannot survive losing. The bond means nothing if law can still be forged. His eyes changed at the gate. Yours answered. That is biology, not safety. Safety is repeatable behavior. Safety is what happens when no one is watching. Hold there. Hold there until facts earn a different answer. Cain inclined his head as if he had heard none of that panic and all of it. "I will be outside the hall if you need anything." He turned to go, then halted at the door. "You may lock it from inside." He left without waiting for gratitude. The south room was narrow, clean, and newly built, its boards still carrying the sharp resin scent of cut fur. A brazier glowed in the corner. 2 pallets lay against the wall with folded quilts between them. Guinevere checked the window latch, the vent grate, the hinge pins, and the floor seam under the door by pure reflex. No hidden viewing slits, no second keyhole, no chain set into stone. When thunder rolled over the ridge, Lyra jerked awake with a cry so raw it seemed torn from her chest. Guinevere gathered her immediately, rocking, humming the old shepherd lullaby from the widow's shed where Lyra had been born. It helped for a breath. Then another thunderclap cracked across the sky, and the child began to sob in panicked hiccups. A quiet knock sounded once. Guinevere froze. Who? Cain. She said nothing. Lyra's cries climbed. His voice came through the wood, lower now, careful. May I sit outside and talk? I will not enter. She stared at the door while Lyra trembled against her shoulder, then answered, Outside. Cain settled on the far side of the threshold. She heard the soft scrape of him leaning back against the wall, heard rain ticking off the eaves into a barrel. He began to speak as if telling a tale to darkness, not to be believed, only to be accompanied. My first den hall burned in a spring raid, he said. I was younger than I should have been, and alpha because no one older was left breathing. We had 12 survivors and one half roof. Every storm that season sent pups under tables shaking because thunder sounded like beam splitting. So we rebuilt slowly. One stone each dawn. One beam each dusk. We taught them the storm did not own the night. We taught ourselves too. Lyra's sobs eased to sniffles, then to exhausted little breaths. Cain kept talking. Not heroic details, only practical ones. How to stack kindling so wet weather could not steal fire. How to dry wool by body heat when stores were gone. How to count fear in people and not despise them for it. By the time silence returned, Guinevere's own breathing had matched the rhythm of rain. I made something for her, he said after a while. No obligation. I can leave it on the sill. Wood tapped lightly against the stone ledge outside the window. She crossed and peeked through the curtain's edge. In the moon-thin light she saw a tiny wolf carved from pale cedar, rough in places, one ear slightly crooked. A child's hand could grip it easily. She did not open the door. Not yet. Near dawn, when the storm had moved east and Lyra finally slept with one fist in Guinevere's tunic, Guinevere eased the latch and opened the door a handspan. Cain was asleep on the floor opposite, head tipped against the wall, boots still on, one hand near his thigh knife, and the other resting over a folded cloak placed nearer to Lyra's pallet than to his own body. He had sat guard all night and taken none of the room, none of her choices, none of the intimacy the bond could have tempted from weaker men. That restraint unsettled her more than any display of dominance had ever done. She closed the door quietly, pressed her forehead to the wood, and for the first time in 3 years allowed herself one dangerous thought. Maybe. By the following evening, Lyra's fever had broken. Her skin felt cool, her appetite returned in cautious bites of broth and oat bread, and she had named the carved wolf Stone Ear, with solemn authority that made Nessa snort laughter into her tea. Cain sent for Guinevere at sunset, not to his private quarters but to the council fire in the main yard, a ring of standing stones around a deep pit where cedar logs burned with steady blue-orange heat. The inner camp gathered there at shift change, builders with lime on their sleeves, hunters with damp cloaks, scouts with burrs in their braids. Guinevere stood at the perimeter with Lyra on her hip, aware of every glance that lingered too long. 2 senior warriors stepped forward when Cain began discussing winter stores. Both wore old rank cords at their shoulders, frayed but proudly displayed. Alpha, said the taller one, Brannock, voice carrying over the fire. We object to the outsider and her pup sleeping within the inner line. Since they arrived, we've had storm damage at the north scaffold and a snapped axle on grain transport. This is bad luck at best and targeted sabotage at worst. Murmurs moved through the ring. The second warrior, Hale, folded his arms. Move them beyond the palisade until lineage and loyalties are proven. Moonrise deadline. That is a reasonable compromise. Guinevere felt Lyra go still against her. The child was old enough to read tone, not words, and fear translated quickly. Cain did not raise his voice. He stepped away from the fire and placed himself between Guinevere and the 2 warriors, shoulders squared, expression stripped to iron. Reasonable, he repeated. To put a recovering child outside our walls in cold rain because your nerves itch. Brannock's jaw tightened. We bled for this camp. We have a say in threat assessment. You do, Kane said, and I have final authority over who is hunted under my roof. The air changed as his alpha command rolled outward, cold and absolute, pressing down on the circle until several wolves dropped their gaze by instinct. Lyra buried her face in Guinevere's neck, then peeked out again when Kane spoke, because his next words were for everyone and, still somehow, for one child. Anyone who puts fear in that child answers to me first. Hale bristled despite the pressure. You are letting Bond scent cloud judgment. We all smelled it at the gate. This is how packs fracture, with private attachments dressed as policy. A dangerous stillness settled over Kane's face. He unclasped the iron wolf pin from Hale's shoulder and held it up between two fingers. Then hear policy clearly. His voice carried to the far scaffold. Hale, son of Marrow, is stripped of senior rank for challenging shelter law and attempting coercive expulsion of a minor under my protection. He keeps his place in patrol rotation at probation level. He may earn back trust by service, not argument. A sharp intake circled the fire. Public demotion was rare and final in its first impact. Kane turned, crossed to where Guinevere stood, and extended his hand. On his palm lay a heavy ring of iron keys, each tagged with hammered tin markers. Supply hall, root cellar, medicine lockbox, and wintercloth stores, he said. You asked for work instead of charity on the gate road. Here is responsibility instead of suspicion. Inventory starts tonight with quartermaster witnesses. Guinevere stared at the keys, then at him. You would hand me your survival stores in front of wolves who do not trust me. I would hand them to the person who has kept a child alive through bounty roads, forged borders, and 3 winters without a pack, he said. Competence is trustable. Fear can learn. Her fingers closed around the keys. They were colder than she expected, solid and undeniable. Brannock looked from Kane to Guinevere, anger warring with the old habit of obedience. If this fails, Alpha, it is on your head. Kane did not blink. If it fails, we face it together. If you threaten my guests again, you answer to law. The meeting resumed in clipped logistics after that, because camps had to eat whether pride was bruised or not. Work assignments were called. Night patrols set. Nessa requested more dried fever leaf. Rook volunteered for Northwatch. Life, stubborn and ordinary, continued around the fracture line. Guinevere remained at the edge, Lyra drowsing against her shoulder, the key ring heavy in her hand, like an unfamiliar kind of weapon. Not sharp, not cruel, legitimate. She watched Kane as he listened to each report, corrected a measurement on beam load, dispatched 2 runners to check the snapped axle, and thanked a young scout for catching rot in the west grain sacks before it spread. No posturing, no theatrical rage, power applied in precise increments. When the fire burned lower and wolves drifted back to shifts and supper, Kane approached but stopped a respectful distance away. If you prefer, he said, Nessa can keep custody of medicine keys until you know the layout. Guinevere shook her head slowly. No, I can do it. A corner of his mouth moved, almost a smile, gone quickly. I thought you could. Lyra lifted her head, sleep-heavy and serious. Stonier stays with us, she informed him, as if setting treaty terms. Kane bowed to her with formal gravity. Stonier's station is secure. For a startled second, a laugh escaped Guinevere, small and rusty from disuse. It felt like a door hinge finally taking oil. Kane's gaze met hers over Lyra's curls, and the bond between them hummed low and steady. Less like a trap now, more like a bridge she had not yet crossed. She did not cross it that night, but when she turned toward the supply hall, she did not look for the nearest escape route first. The key ring bit into Guinevere's palm as she crossed the yard, its weight real enough to steady her when the bond's low thrum kept trying to pull her attention back toward the fire and the male who had trusted her in front of his whole camp. The supply hall sat against the inner wall, half stone, half newly raised timber. Inside, cedar shelves ran from floor to rafters, stacked with grain sacks, dried roots, lamp oil, winter cloth, and salvage iron sorted by size. 2 quartermasters waited with slate boards and chalk. One was a narrow-shouldered woman with a scar through her eyebrow, the other a broad young man with lime dust on his boots. They introduced themselves as Tamsin and Orin, offered no false warmth, and started counting with brisk precision. Guinevere moved through rows in methodical rhythm, reading tags, checking seals, making note of mold risk and cracked lids. Work narrowed the world into sums and corrections, into proof that skill still mattered more than rumor if one had enough patience. When she reached a crate of medicinal spirits stamped for the mountain route, she paused. The brand mark had been sanded and restamped, clumsy enough that old grain lines showed beneath. Under the new crest, almost invisible in the lantern angle, sat a partial blackwood sigil. Orin followed her gaze. That load came through East Traders 2 weeks ago, paid in council scrip. Who signed intake? Brannock. Why? She ran her thumb over the raised edge where old and new marks met. Because someone wanted the original source obscured. By the time they finished first inventory pass, the night had thinned toward moonset, and her shoulders ached from carrying ledgers and sacks. She stepped into the corridor and found Kane at the far end, leaning one shoulder against the post near the infirmary door, speaking softly with Nessa. Lyra's sleepy laugh drifted through the crack in the wood, bright and brief, and relief loosened something tight behind Guinevere's ribs before she could stop it. Kane turned as she approached. How bad? Not bad. Interesting. She held up the amended manifest. Re-stamped spirits, mismatched entries, intake signed without second witness. Could be careless. Could be staged. His expression sharpened. Show me. They bent over the ledger together under one wall lantern, shoulders almost touching. Guinevere could feel his warmth through 2 layers of cloth and the crisp mountain scent that now lived at the edge of her awareness like weather. He did not crowd her. He listened, asked direct questions, and accepted every correction she made to existing stock records without defensiveness. That competence was a dangerous comfort. A horn sounded at the gate, 3 short blasts in formal sequence. Rook's voice carried across the yard. Delegation under moon truce. Council seal. Kane took the ledger from her, thumb resting for half a breath over where her hand had been on the page. Stay with Nessa and Lyra. I am your supply officer now, remember? I go where threat touches stores and law. The corner of his mouth shifted with reluctant approval. Then you stand at my left. At the gate, torchlight spilled over 6 mounted wolves in dark travel cloaks. Their lead rider dismounted with a practiced show of deference, removed his hood, and gave Guinevere a smile she had known since childhood, the one that looked gentle at distance and predatory up close. Fenris Nightshade wore morning black trimmed in silver thread, blackwood rings still bright on his hands as if no exile decree had ever passed through them. 2 attendants stepped forward with lacquered cases, opening them to reveal rolled blood ledgers, stamped writs, and a velvet bundle of old house sigils. The crux of his strategy was visible in the first breath. Make theft look like guardianship. Make conquest look like law. Cousin, Fenris said, gaze resting on Guinevere as though they were meeting at a harvest feast instead of across armed lines. You look thin. Hard roads do not suit you. Kane did not offer him greeting bread or fire cup. State business. Fenris inclined his head, all polished diplomacy. By authority of Moon Court Registry and Emergency Succession Statute, I present claim over minor Lyra, last direct Blackwood pup by blood. Guinevere's public rejection voided her standing in line management. As acting steward, I will assume guardianship until lawful placement is arranged. Guinevere felt the night narrow to a single point. You forged quarter ledgers before. You forged ritual consent. You will not touch my child. He clicked his tongue softly, as if disappointed in her tone. Still theatrical. I brought documents to spare us theatrics. One attendant handed Kane a scroll sealed in blue wax. Kane broke it, read once, then passed it to Guinevere. The script was genuine court hand. The citation existed. The signature line bore a registrar name she remembered from older tax notices. Mila Thornridge. Fenris watched her read. You see? Procedure. Procedure had branded her skin and called it mercy. Procedure had opened a gate so hunters could follow her for years. Guinevere kept her face still, but inside her mind moved in hard, present tense lines. He is counting on panic. He is counting on your history with closed rooms and stamped papers. Breathe. Read every line. Find the hinge. There is always a hinge. Lyra is in a warm bed. Lyra is guarded. You are not alone in a locked wing now. You answer in public and make him answer in public with you. Do not let him drag this into private bargaining. Do not let him choose the room again. Kane folded his arms. No transfer happens at my gate. Any claim is heard in Moon Court with witnesses. Fenris's gaze flicked to him, polite contempt barely veiled. Alpha Ironhold, rumors say you shelter many strays. I respect your charitable impulses. This is lineage law, not rescue work. The guards along the wall shifted at that word, strays. Kane's jaw hardened. In my territory, wolves are named. Fenris's smile thinned. Then name your legal basis for withholding a Highline child from her house. Maternal claim stands until verified revocation under current court review, Kane said. I know the statute as well as you do. For the first time, irritation cracked Fenris's composure. He recovered in a blink and spread his hands. Very well. I petition formal hearing. Until then, I request supervised visitation. No, Guinevere said, clear enough for every sentry to hear. Denied. Fenris looked at her as if Kane had taught her a trick. You deny Blackwood blood? I deny you. He stepped back, signaling his riders. Then we proceed the long way. Keep the writ. Read Appendix 4 before dawn. It concerns penalties for harboring abducted heirs. He mounted, nodded once to Kane with mock courtesy, and rode out under truce lanterns. The delegation vanished between pines, leaving the smell of wet leather and expensive oil behind. Kane exhaled only when the last hoofbeat faded. Rook, double gate watch. No one enters on paperwork alone. Tamsin, secure archives and old stamps. He turned to Guinevere. Appendix 4 is leverage language. He wants you frightened enough to surrender before court. He wants your trade partners frightened too. Kane's eyes met hers. Then we remove fear faster than he can spread it. 3 days passed before the first reply came from Moon Court, and every hour in between carried a new pressure point. At dawn, Kane sent 2 fast runners and a raven tube with copies of Fenris's writ to Registrar Mila for seal verification. By evening, traders from the Eastern Pass arrived with half their usual load and too many questions about kidnapping charges. By the next morning, rumors had outrun facts. Guinevere had bewitched the Alpha. Ironhold planned a blood coup. Lyra had been hidden because she was sickly, because she was sacred, because she was not real. Each version served Fenris by making certainty expensive. Kane answered with open ledgers at midday assembly. Every ration line read aloud, every new arrival logged publicly. He posted shelter law at the main well and required 2 witnesses on all intake marks. It was governance as counterspell. Guinevere worked until her wrists ached, cross-checking stock against origin routes, tracing where re-stamped crates entered, noting which signatures clustered around missing quantities. Hale, stripped of rank, reported on time each shift and kept his eyes lowered when they crossed paths. Brannock stayed civil and cold. Tamsin proved relentless and precise, and after 2 nights she started handing Guinevere corrected tallies without commentary, which in Ironhold counted as trust. The bond did not ask permission while any of this happened. It surfaced in fragments that felt almost ordinary. Cain passing her a cup of bitter tea exactly when her hands began to tremble from hunger. His palm hovering near her back as they descended icy steps without ever making contact, the way his attention found Lyra first whenever he entered a room and softened before he remembered to school his expression. Attraction built not from grand declarations but from repeated proof. On the 4th evening of Fenris's challenge, thunder moved along the far ridge. Lyra slept in Nessa's room, Stone Ear tucked under her arm, while Guinevere and Cain stood in the archive alcove reviewing intake slips by lantern light. Cain read one page, frowned, and held it out. This refugee group signed as Marsh Hollow families. Their hand calluses are bowstring and blade, not net and reed. I noticed. Guinevere pointed to the margin note she had made earlier. And the woman called Sella knew old Blackwood kitchen roots she should never have seen. You think planted? I think disguised, tested, and waiting. He set the papers down. I can remove them tonight. Not yet. If we push too early, we only prove we are paranoid hosts. We watch where they move when they think no one is measuring. He looked at her for a long moment. Admiration and worry braided tight. You learned this from running? I learned from being hunted by people who smiled first. He lifted his hand, then stopped halfway. May I? At her nod, he touched 2 fingers lightly to the inside of her marked wrist, where the old crescent scar lived under skin. Warmth spread from that contact, not overwhelming, but steady, like heat from banked coals. Guinevere closed her eyes for one breath and let herself lean into stillness she had never believed she would be allowed. A runner skidded into the corridor. Alpha, reply tube from court. Cain took it, broke the wax, and scanned quickly. His face went flat. He passed the strip to Guinevere. Registrar Maela confirmed her office had issued no emergency guardianship order in Lyra's name. The seal on Fenris's writ matched obsolete dies retired after a fire 2 winters prior. Formal investigation opened. Pending hearing, all involved parties were ordered to appear at Moon Court within 10 days under escort. Below the official line, in cramped side script, was a warning. Forged copies of the abduction accusation were already circulating among border councils. Cain folded the strip. We leave for court at first light with 30 guards. Guinevere nodded, pulse climbing. Fenris will not wait for daylight. He reached for the alarm bell rope. The strike came with the smell of lamp oil. Flame burst along the lower eaves of the West Store Annex, fast and bright, too clean to be accidental. A second fire answered at the wagon shed. Shouts tore through the yard as wolves ran for water lines and sand buckets. In the same heartbeat, 3 so-called refugees in patched cloaks dropped their bundles and drew short blades blackened to kill light. Inside saboteurs! Rook yelled from the well. Lock the inner lane. Cain shoved Guinevere behind a stone post as one attacker lunged from the smoke. She drove the heavy key ring into the man's wrist, metal-cracking bone hard enough to make him drop his blade, then swept his knee and sent him into the mud. Another came from the archive side with a cloth mask over his mouth and a hooked baton meant for disarming, not killing. He aimed for her hands, for the keys. Not random then. Targeted. Guinevere caught the baton on her forearm, pain flashing white, and twisted with him into the wall. Her instincts sharpened to a predatory edge she had buried for years. Nails lengthened, teeth pressing down behind her lips. Not a full shift, but enough to alter leverage. She drove her shoulder into his chest and tore the satchel from his belt. Inside lay copied floor maps of Ironhold and a list of guard rotations in cramped script. Cain fought 3 paces away, movement economical and brutal in its efficiency, disarming one attacker, dropping another, barking orders between strikes. Nessa to secure wing, No one touches infirmary door. Brannock, North Pump Line. Hale, with me. Hale obeyed instantly, tackling a fleeing saboteur at the gate ditch and pinning him until Rook bound his wrists. A third blaze caught near the archive roof, then sputtered as bucket crews smothered it. Tamsin emerged, coughing, carrying a locked stamp case against her chest like a rescued infant. They wanted this, she rasped. Two of them went straight for the seal shelf. Within minutes, the fires were contained to outer structures, smoke rolling low across the yard. 5 infiltrators lay bound near the well. 2 were dead from the fight, faces covered by cloth out of grim respect. No civilians lost, no child harmed. But the camp had been breached from inside by people they had fed. Rook hauled one captive upright and ripped off his hood. The man spat soot and smiled through split lip. Too late, Ironhold. Kane stepped forward, voice like winter iron. Who sent you? The captive turned his head toward Guinevere, triumph bright in his eyes despite the ropes cutting his wrists. Moon Court summons amended at dusk, blood right trial granted on emergency petition. Fenris Nightshade names claim over the Blackwood line and demands proxy combat before full council. Guinevere felt the night tilt again, but this time she stayed on her feet without effort. The captive laughed once, then coughed. If you do not appear by moonrise tomorrow, the court can rule by default. Child transferred, territory sanctioned. Kane and Guinevere looked at each other through drifting smoke and torch glare, both understanding the same hard equation. Fenris had moved the board from rumor to law and lit their walls to slow response. If they rode now, they rode tired and exposed. If they stayed, they forfeited Lyra by procedure. Kane took Guinevere's uninjured hand, brief and fierce. We ride within the hour. Behind them, the West Annex roof groaned, then collapsed inward in a shower of sparks, and the bell began to ring for war muster. The war bell kept striking as sparks drifted from the collapsed annex, and the crux of the next hour was brutal in its simplicity. Reach Moon Court fast enough to keep law from becoming another weapon in Fenris's hands. Kane gave orders in clipped bursts while bucket lines stamped out the last tongues of flame. Rook and Hale hauled the bound infiltrators to iron carts. Tamsin thrust the rescued stamp case and 2 wrapped ledgers into Guinevere's arms, along with the satchel she had torn from the masked attacker. Nessa arrived with Lyra bundled and awake, stone ear tucked under one arm, confusion clouding her sleepy face but no fear, not with Nessa's hand steady at her back. You ride in the center carriage, Kane told Guinevere. Hale and Brannock on the doors. Nessa with Lyra. No one separates you. Guinevere met his gaze through smoke and torch glare. Fenris asked for proxy combat. He expects you to step in and make this a contest between men. Kane's expression went hard. What do you want? Court floor. My voice. Then you have it. Within the hour, 30 riders and 2 covered wagons cut through the ridge road under cloud-hidden moonlight. Rain slicked stone. Hooves struck sparks where the path narrowed against old cliff cuts. Guinevere sat beside Lyra in the jolting carriage, one hand around the child, the other wrapped around the keyring she still had not set down. Her forearm throbbed where the hooked baton had caught her, and dried soot marked the cuffs of her borrowed cloak. Nessa cleaned the scrape in the dark by touch alone and tied fresh linen without comment. Across from them, the bound infiltrator who had delivered Fenris's message stared at the floorboards and smiled whenever the wheels hit a rut, as if each jolt brought him closer to a victory he could already taste. Guinevere leaned toward him. Who amended the summons? He turned his head slowly, chain links clinking at his wrists. You will hear the name in court. Hale rode the carriage step outside, a steady shadow at the curtained gap. Once, when the road pitched hard, Lyra reached toward the opening and he passed Stone Ear back, after it slipped from her blanket with awkward gentleness, not meeting Guinevere's eyes. That single gesture said more than apology speeches ever could. 2 hours before dawn, the black pines broke, and Moon Court rose from the valley floor in concentric rings of pale stone. Torches burned blue along the outer colonnade. Pack banners rippled from carved pylons. Wolves from half a dozen territories crowded the amphitheater steps despite the hour, drawn by rumor, bloodline, and the promise of public precedent. Wardens opened the gate at Kane's shouted demand and froze when they saw the bound infiltrators in iron-hold chains. The chief warden stepped forward. Proceedings are already called. Petitioning party claims default risk. Kane dismounted. Proceedings can continue with all parties present, announced Guinevere Blackwood. Fenris stood near the central runestone in immaculate black, hair tied high, gloves pale against his sleeves. 3 council elders flanked him, and one of them, Elder Varric of the Eastern Marches, held an amended writ tube already unsealed. Fenris smiled when Guinevere entered the ring, as if this entire night had unfolded exactly to his design. "Cousin?" he said, voice carrying. "I worried the road fires might delay you." Kane moved half a step forward. Guinevere touched his wrist once and passed him. Lyra still in Nessa's arms behind the ward line. She stopped at the claimant mark etched into stone and lifted her chin. "I am present. I contest every line." Elder Varric struck his staff. "By emergency petition, blood right trial convenes. Minor succession and territorial consequences attached. As custom requires, female claimant may appoint male proxy for combat adjudication." Fenris spread one hand toward Kane, almost gracious. "Choose well, Guinevere. If your alpha loses, this ends quickly." "I appoint no proxy," she said. Murmurs rose immediately, sharp and disbelieving. Elder Varric frowned. "Custom recognizes representation for your protection." "Custom stripped me once and called it order." Her voice did not shake. "I claim direct standing under the old Blackwood inheritance article, still active under Moon Law unless repealed by full council vote. Name the repeal record if you have it." Silence answered. Varric's mouth tightened. Fenris's smile thinned for the first time. He shifted tactics at once. "Then we begin with custody transfer pending deliberation. Wardens, remove the child to neutral chambers." 2 wardens turned toward Nessa. Lyra tightened both arms around Stoneear and buried her face in Nessa's shoulder, unharmed but startled. "Stop," Guinevere said, and the word cracked across the court harder than a shout. "No hand touches my daughter while forged papers sit in this ring." She stepped to Kane and took the packet he had carried from Ironhold. Registrar Mela's verification strip, the obsolete seal impressions, the re-stamped manifest with hidden Blackwood mark, and the satchel maps from the saboteurs. She handed them directly to the nearest neutral scribe, not to Varric. "Log all physical evidence on open slate. Read seal dates aloud." The scribe obeyed under the weight of public eyes. One by one the details landed. Obsolete die marks retired after fire, signature mismatch, route maps matching Ironhold's inner lanes, intake codes copied from Blackwood archive style. Fenris did not flinch. He simply lifted his chin and looked to Varric. "Circumstantial. None of this proves blood claim invalidity. We can spend days drowning in paperwork while a Highline child remains improperly held." Varric nodded, ready to move on. "Blood proof settles what ledgers cannot." Guinevere knew then that argument alone would not break the alliance Fenris had built. The choice stood bare in front of her, sharp as winter air. She could accept procedural delay and gamble Lyra's fate on council politics, or she could invoke the right her mother had once called a last door with no lock on the other side. She walked to the runestone. Kane's voice came low behind her. "Guinevere." She looked back once. "If I fail, do not let him near Lyra." His jaw flexed. "You are not failing." She drew the small utility blade from her belt and sliced her palm over the stone's central groove. Pain flashed clean and immediate. Blood struck ancient carvings and spread in thin branching lines. The amphitheater seemed to inhale. "I invoke Blackwood inheritance verification," she said. "Truth over testimony. Witnessed by Mooncourt." For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then light moved under the stone like moonfire under ice. Silver lines climbed her wrist, met the old rejection crescent, and flared. The force hit her knees. She stayed upright by sheer will, fingers splayed on the runestone while the court blurred at the edges of her vision. Images burst above the ring in wavering light. Fenris at a ledger desk pressing old dies into wax after midnight. Fenris's attendant paying a registrar clerk in Eastern coin. The same attendant passing route maps to cloaked refugees beside a tannery wall. Brannock's intake signature copied, then altered. Varric's steward receiving sealed parcels with Nightshade signet. Gasps rolled through the crowd. One elder stepped back as if struck. Fenris's composure cracked. "Illusion trickery. She is unstable. End this now." He moved suddenly, fast enough that two wardens reached too late, angling not for Guinevere but for the ward line where Nessa held Lyra. Kane intercepted his path, shoulder to shoulder, forcing him offline without drawing kill. Fenris twisted free with a curse and lunged again. Guinevere's body answered before thought could slow it. Heat surged through muscle and bone. Claws edged from her fingers. Her canines lengthened as she pushed off the stone, hit Fenris at the ribs, and drove him across the court floor. The impact knocked the breath from both of them. He clawed for balance, one hand already inside his sleeve. "Chain him!" someone shouted. The runestone answered her blood call. Silver-bound links erupted from the carved groove, whipping around Fenris's wrists and chest, pinning him hard to the central post. He snarled, fighting the binding with desperate strength. One link snapped with a metallic crack. From inside his cuff, he pulled a narrow bone blade and slashed at the remaining chain. Kane stepped into Fenris's escape arc and held position, a wall of muscle and command, eyes locked on Guinevere, not the blade. He would stop flight. He would not take her justice. Fenris rose from one knee, breath ragged, blade shaking in his grip. "You were always the weak branch." Guinevere stood 3 paces away, blood still dripping from her palm onto stone that glowed brighter with each drop. "No, I was the branch you kept trying to cut." He bared his teeth and charged. She met him head-on, turned her body into the strike, caught his blade wrist with both hands, and drove her knee into his center to break momentum. The weapon clattered away. She forced him down, one arm locked across his shoulders, the other braced at his throat just enough to keep him pinned without spectacle. The court saw every movement. No theatrics, no hidden blow. Fenris spat at her boots and laughed once, breathless and venomous. "You were nothing without a male name." Her answer came steady as oath. "I was your blood, and you sold me. You are nothing without lies." She looked to the elders. "I invoke execution clause for proven kin betrayal under witnessed inheritance right. Let the stone judge." For 3 long heartbeats, no one spoke. Then Elder Serial, oldest at the ring and silent until now, struck her staff once. Clause recognized. The runestone flared white-silver. Chains reformed around Fenris's torso and tightened with final, inexorable force. Light swallowed his outline, then dropped away. When it cleared, he lay still at the base of the post, eyes open to the sky, the bone blade far beyond his reach. No one moved. Then voices rose in fragments across the tiers, not chaos this time, but witness becoming verdict. Scribes wrote, wardens sealed evidence crates. Varric's steward was dragged from the eastern bench in irons. Nessa shifted Lyra to her other shoulder and covered the child's eyes until the body was removed, keeping her safe from the sight while the law completed its work. Guinevere swayed once as the right's backlash tore through her limbs. Kane caught her elbow, careful of her bleeding hand. "It is done," he said, rough with restrained fury and relief. She looked at Fenris's empty place on the stone, then at Lyra alive in Nessa's arms, then at the court that had finally seen what she had carried alone for years. "It is done," she echoed, and this time the words held. Kane did not let go of her elbow until the wardens opened a side chamber off the court colonnade. A quiet stone room warmed by a brazier and guarded at both doors by Rook and Hale, in full view of witnesses. Nessa carried Lyra to the narrow bed by the wall, laid Stone Ear under her daughter's hand, and drew the wool cover to her chin. The child sighed once, turned toward the carved wolf, and slept through the distant rumble of voices as Moon Court processed treason, seals, and bodies. Only when Nessa stepped back and nodded did Guinevere allow her knees to soften. Kane caught her with both hands this time, steady and careful, as if she were fierce glass. "You're shaking," he murmured. "The rite took more than I planned." Her palms still bled in a slow line, silver light fading from the cut. She looked at Lyra, then back at him. "She is safe. She is safe." His gaze searched her face, then dropped to the old crescent scar at her wrist and the fresh blood on her hand. "Guinevere, I want to ask for something. I will accept no." She swallowed. The bond between them had stopped roaring and become a deep, relentless current that touched breath, pulse, thought. Not command, not cage. Presence. "Ask." He stepped closer, then stopped, giving her the final distance. "May I mark you here, with your consent and witness, as equal mate under moon law and my own?" Every memory that had ever taught her to fear male authority rose and stood in that space between them. This was the crux, stripped to bone. Not whether she wanted him, but whether wanting could coexist with dignity. She looked at his face and saw no triumph there, only reverence, and a discipline so hard-won it moved her more than any declaration. She lifted her uninjured hand and touched his chest, right over his heart. "Yes, but equal, as you said. You do not claim what you will not also offer." "I offer all of it." He bent and rested his forehead against hers first, breathing with her until her pulse slowed. Then he asked, "Here," and let his fingers hover at the junction of her neck and shoulder, waiting. Guinevere took his wrist and guided his hand to the place herself. "Here." His mouth brushed her skin once in warning, warm and deliberate. The bite came deep enough to seal, pain bright as winter air, then widening into a rush of heat that poured through her chest and down her spine like molten gold, finding every cold place she had carried for years. Her breath broke on his name, her knees buckled, and his arm locked around her waist, holding her upright without trapping her. In the bond, sensation became language. She felt his grief from the burned den hall, the weight of rebuilding one stone at a time, the quiet fury he had banked whenever he saw fear in Lyra's eyes, the moment at the gate when one fevered whisper had split him open. She felt how carefully he had chosen every restraint. He pulled back, lips stained red, eyes gone feral with devotion and control. His voice scraped low against her ear. "Mine." Tears stung without warning. Not from hurt, from being wanted without being erased. She cupped his jaw, turned his face as he had turned hers, and bared her teeth. "My turn," she whispered. He nodded once, throat working. "Yours." She bit where neck met shoulder through his collar line, a hard, clean mark that drew blood, and a raw sound from him he did not hide. Power surged back through the bond, not one direction, but two, braided and locking into place. The ache in her wrist eased. The old rejection scar burned, then cooled, as if an ancient sentence had finally been overwritten by consent. She released him and pressed her forehead to his again, both of them breathing hard, both marked. "Mate," she said. The word of vow and verdict. "Mate," he answered. For several heartbeats they only held each other, palms at napes, thumbs brushing over new bite marks, while the bond settled from wildfire to foundation. Outside, the court bell rang once for session recall. Inside, Guinevere felt the tight knot she had lived behind for 3 years loosen, thread by thread, until she could stand in her own skin without bracing for the next strike. Nessa cleared her throat softly from the door, eyes suspiciously bright and professionally stern. If the two of you are done rewriting half our customs in my treatment room, the elders request your presence. A short laugh escaped Kane, rough with relief. Guinevere almost smiled through tears. Rook opened the door wider. Mooncourt is seated. Registrar Mayella arrived at dawn with original seal ledgers. By midday, the court floor was full again. Sariel presided with staff in hand while scribes read every item into permanent record. Tamsin's rescued stamp case, the obsolete die impressions, the re-stamped spirit manifest with the hidden Blackwood crest, the saboteur's route maps, the bone blade recovered at the runestone, and sworn testimony from Registrar Mayella confirming forged orders and bribed clerks. Oren identified altered intake lines. Rook submitted the captured infiltrators. Sella and the disguised Marsh Hollow group were named as hired operatives and remanded for sentencing under Interpack law. Varick was stripped of council authority pending treason trial and removed in irons from the Eastern Bench. When asked for judgment on Blackwood's succession, Sariel looked directly at Guinevere. Your rights were illegally severed. Your daughter is lawfully under your protection. Your bloodline stands restored. Then she turned to Kane. Ironhold's shelter law prevented unlawful transfer and preserved evidence under attack. Moon Court recognizes Ironhold as sovereign rebuilding territory in joint covenant with House Blackwood, under the bonded rule of Alpha Kane Ironhold and Luna Queen Guinevere Blackwood. No cheer broke the chamber. Wolves were too formal for that. But one by one, elders struck staffs to stone in assent, and the sound rolled like thunder, made orderly. By the second full moon after the trial, the last burned hall in Ironhold stood rebuilt with new cedar beams and old stone footings, no longer a war barracks but a school on the east side and infirmary on the west, the carved lintel reading Lyra House in simple iron letters Kane had hammered himself. Children recited herb names at one table while Nessa instructed 2 apprentice healers at another. Sanctuary petitions lined Guinevere's desk. Rejected wolves, orphaned pups, widowed scouts asking lawful entry. She signed the first sanctuary statute with a steady hand, then handed enforcement to Brannock and Hale together, one as quartermaster inspector, one as gate captain, each accountable to the other under public audit. Neither thanked her with speeches. They did the work. At dusk, the courtyard filled for Lyra's first formal naming under joint banners. The child wore a plain gray cloak with a tiny silver clasp shaped like Stone Ear's crooked ear. Guinevere knelt to straighten it. Kane knelt opposite, big hands absurdly gentle as Lyra insisted on holding both their fingers at once. Sariel raised her staff. Witness Lyra Blackwood Ironhold, protected child of bonded rulers, heir to no throne of fear, only to law and home. Around them, Ironhold builders, former Blackwood retainers and court delegates, lowered to one knee in a single wave. Garin stood among the visiting guards, older and stiff in one leg. But when Guinevere met his eyes, he touched 2 fingers to brow in the same silent salute he had given at the tannery gate years ago. She returned it, and this time there was no need to run. Lyra looked up at the kneeling crowd, then at her parents, solemn as moonrise. Are we staying? Guinevere squeezed her hand. Yes. Kane's thumb brushed the fresh mark at Guinevere's neck, then the answering mark she had left on him, and his voice carried just to his family. No more exile. Guinevere leaned into him, into Lyra, into the bond that had become oath, law, and shelter all at once. No more asking to be kept.